at Gallaudet University, the Chinese University, Hong Kong, and Ratchasoda College of Mahidol University, Thailand, and also at Dong Nai Provincial Department of Education and Training, Vietnam. So since 2004, he has also been an honorary adjunct professor in the Department of Linguistics and Modern Languages and co-director of the Center for Sign Linguistics and Deaf Studies at Chinese University. He has publications on sign language, social linguistics, universal and unique characteristics of sign language, and deaf education. His current research interests include historical comparative relationships of sign language and the description and documentation of endangered sign languages. So over to you, Professor Woodward.
Okay, can everyone who can hear me, and can everyone else see the interpreters?
Yes, Professor.
Okay, all right, so I have a PowerPoint because easier for me to remember. Shaimani, I sent you the PowerPoint. Do you want me to show it or do you want to show it?
Would you be able to show it, Woody? Would that be all right? My connectivity isn't great today.
Say again?
My connectivity isn't great today. So would you mind sharing the slides? Yeah.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Okay, no problem. Hopefully here it goes. Okay, so basically the title of the presentation is how university education for deaf people was established in Vietnam. So it's kind of talking about the transition from secondary education to tertiary education. But in fact, we didn't have any secondary education when we proposed setting up a university education program. So we had to establish both secondary education and tertiary education. This program is the first opportunity for university level education for deaf people in Vietnam. Since in 2000, the highest level of education taught to deaf students was 5th grade. So we established a bilingual program, junior high school, senior high school, teaching in Vietnamese and Ho Chi Minh City Sign Language. The project was funded by the Nippon Foundation, and the basic idea was that it demonstrates that most countries in the region could establish tertiary educational institutional programs for deaf people, even though the country had few resources and had no previous sign language research. So Ms. Hua, who unfortunately cannot be here today, and I contacted the Ministry of Education in Hanoi to explain the project. And basically the ministry was not very interested in cooperating because they said deaf people in Vietnam were not able to study at the junior high school level. So of course they couldn't study at university, and that sign languages in Vietnam did not have enough vocabulary. And we explained that the deaf people in the US and Thailand, among other countries, were already studying at university level. We also explained that there was sufficient vocabulary to teach at university level, and that basically new vocabulary would develop as the courses were taught. And the representatives from the ministry said deaf people in Thailand and the US were different from people in Vietnam. And they also said that sign languages did not and could not have sufficient vocabulary. So then we approached the Dong Nai Provincial Department of Education, and they basically agreed that we could do the program and that students from all over Vietnam could attend the program. So I mentioned this because you may think, oh, well, if the Ministry of Education doesn't support what we're doing, we can't do it. And that's not true at all in most countries. Okay, so here's at the bottom of the Vietnam, you see Ho Chi Minh City. Bien Hoa City is located about 26 kilometers north of Ho Chi Minh City. And here's the facilities. So basically you can take a look there. And we can show this later if you want. So the project was funded by the Nippon Foundation and is intended to serve as a model program. Okay, so the project results. We taught several programs: a certificate in sign language analysis, a certificate in sign language teaching, grade 6 through grade 12, a university certificate in education, and a BA degree in deaf education. I don't have the exact percentages for every grade with me, but basically 94% or above of the students passed their grades. Now, it's just an interesting slide, I think you will find. This is basically outside our program. The deaf students and hearing students in Dong Nai province had to take standardized national exams. And as you see, in most of the years when the exams were offered, deaf people scored significantly higher on national examinations for junior high school and senior high school than hearing people did in the same province. And in 2 years, deaf students scored particularly high. In 2003, one deaf student scored 5th in all Dong Nai, 5th in all Dong Nai. And in 2006, one deaf student scored 1st in the whole province. So the students are basically doing quite well. Oops, let me get back onto this. Okay, for the university results, the curriculum is a standard curriculum, and I should mention in the high school, curriculum is a standard curriculum also for the Ministry of Education. It's taught bilingually in Ho Chi Minh City Sign Language and written Vietnamese. Classes are taught in self-contained classrooms and are not mainstreamed. Hearing students who know the local sign language can be accepted into the program and study with deaf students. Teachers who can sign for themselves do so. Teachers who cannot sign for themselves have sign language interpreters. Ample time is provided for peer group interaction, and this is a very important tool for deaf learners. So of the 32 students applying to the program, 32 were accepted, 32 finished their BA degrees, and 66% of these 32 students, 21 students, finished their BAs with honors. So let me check the time real quick. Okay. The goal of the first project was simply to open university education in Vietnam. And we were going to do this through sign language analysis, teaching, and interpretation. And the goal of the second Dong Nai project has been training, promoting, and hiring deaf teachers in Vietnam. And these goals were reachable by building a strong foundation slowly and carefully based on the cultural model of deafness. So most people, especially hearing people, follow the medical model of deafness in urbanized communities. They say, well, the problem is deaf people can't hear. And deaf people have a medical pathology. They should go to doctors for treatment. That deafness can and should be cured by technology. Deaf people cannot integrate into society because they have problems. And speech is very important. Deaf people think about themselves in different ways in urbanized communities in many countries. And deaf people say, deafness doesn't mean we can't hear or we don't hear. It simply means that we use a different language. Deaf people are not sick. We are different. We're simply different. Deaf children should interact with deaf adults. Deafness does not need to be cured. And the problem in integration is as much a problem in the society as deaf people themselves. And more hearing people need to sign, and sign language and writing are much more important than speech. If you go back to the Ministry of Education comments, they were clearly following the medical model. They didn't want any hearing children learning with deaf children to learn sign language because that would make the hearing children too deaf. So this is a very negative view about deaf people. And our model follows a cultural model of deafness, and I think this is the primary reason why the model was successful. So given the situation in Vietnam at the start of the project, it was impossible to establish a college education program, especially a bilingual college education program. So we need to develop the junior high school program first. But instead of just starting the junior high school program, we basically set up a certificate program in sign language analysis to prepare for sign language teaching materials, and then a certificate program in sign language teaching to train deaf people how to teach Vietnamese Sign Language to their own hearing teachers. Oops, it's just not going on to the next one. Okay, so the program in sign language analysis was training deaf people how to analyze their own sign languages, how to make dictionaries, how to produce grammatical handbooks, and how to produce sign language teaching textbooks. Here are some examples of students working on this project. And it's some examples of teaching materials and knowledge dictionaries. So the program in sign language teaching was designed to train deaf people in Vietnam how to teach their own sign languages to hearing people, especially to their own hearing teachers, and to hearing people who want to become sign language interpreters. Courses in the certificate program in sign language teaching were taught only by deaf instructors. There's some examples of deaf students practice teaching. And in the first years of the program, first 3 years of the program, 2000 and 2003, the sign language certificate was taught to 43 students, 41 or 95% passed, and the sign language teaching program was taught to 22 students, and 16 or 72% pass. We believe that two primary reasons for the high success rate is that it's a deaf-centered project and is independent of the existing educational system for deaf people in Vietnam. We accept that the fact that the most qualified people to talk about deaf education are deaf adults, especially those trained in sign linguistics. We give deaf adults substantial decision-making power within educational programs. So if they don't like a particular way a teacher communicates, we will dismiss that teacher from teaching them. So the project recognizes that Vietnamese deaf people are linguistic minorities that have their own languages and cultures. So only deaf people, we train deaf people in analysis and we train them in teaching, and basically only deaf people fluent in Ho Chi Minh City Sign Language are allowed to teach. And we only train deaf people to teach. If people like parents of deaf people, teachers, schools, and other individuals outside the project request sign language instruction, we tell them that we will send them a deaf teacher. If they say they don't want a deaf teacher, then the project will inform them that they will have to accept a deaf teacher or the project cannot be of assistance. Okay, deaf adults make their own decisions about the use of hearing aids, and most of them don't use hearing aids. And deaf adult students make the decision about whether they want to be taught speech or lip reading, and no deaf students have so far wanted to be taught those subjects. Deaf students individually decide on what forms of communication they want to use inside and outside the classroom. So basically, I think I just talked about most of this. So when deaf students finish the college program, Ms. Hua has worked with graduates and has found them jobs, and she has established a new school run and staffed primarily by deaf adults. So how am I doing on time? A couple of more minutes. Okay. So many schools for deaf people in Vietnam were and remain resistant to the cultural model of deafness, and even more resistant to the idea of a deaf-centered program. So we established our program independent of any other existing program for deaf people in Vietnam. And the project is located in a province that is willing to experiment with new projects. The project is located in a university that was and remains willing to accept innovative programs. And they didn't have a special education department, so they were happy for us to set up the program. It has long-term financial support from one grantor, the Nippon Foundation, but we keep the costs low, about 40,000 US dollars a year. And we have about 45 students in any one given year at different levels. And Vietnamese hearing teachers working on the project are not normally dependent exclusively on the project for their livelihood. I can explain this more later if you're interested. Okay, additional factors here. If you want, we can come back to this. And the project is succeeding in Vietnam at an average rate of less than $40,000 per year. And we don't spend a lot on technology, so we can keep the costs low. And we believe that similar projects can be developed in other countries who want to establish tertiary education for a fairly low cost. If you want to find more about the program, you can contact Ms. Hua at hoatng@yahoo.com. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Woodward, for enlightening us with the two very successful projects carried out in Vietnam. And surely people would love to know more about it. Since we are a little bit tight in the schedule, now we would move on to the presentation by Professor Gladys Tang. Professor Tang received her doctoral degree in applied linguistics at the University of Edinburgh. Her research interests are second language acquisition and applied linguistics. Apart from spoken language acquisition, her research interests span over a series of research projects on linguistics of Hong Kong Sign Language, the acquisition of sign language, and the development of deaf literacy by deaf children. She has publications on second language acquisition, second language pedagogy, sign linguistics, and sign language acquisition and deaf education. She's the director of the Center for Sign Linguistics and Deaf Studies, Chinese University, Hong Kong. She's also the Asian liaison of International Sign Linguistic Society, and she's a member of the advisory board of Sign Language Linguistic Society. Over to you.
Okay, actually, I have a PowerPoint. I think that would be more useful. I wonder if I could share my own PowerPoint. Can someone release me so that I can use my own PowerPoint here? So can I share my PowerPoint now?
You should be able to.
Okay, thank you. Let me just check. Right, wonderful. Now I have uploaded the PowerPoint in the chat room, just in case, people are interested. Now let me start with my PowerPoint. Okay, are you able to see my PowerPoint now in the projection mode?
Yes, Professor Tang.
Okay, now we call this sign bilingualism and co-enrollment education. It is in fact a response to the global trend of nurturing inclusiveness in society with diversities. Now I am going to show you the next one. So why do we, establish SALCO? We would like to give an option to our deaf children, especially in response to the change of philosophy of deaf education from segregation to integration and inclusion. So how are we going to, bring, the whole concept of sign linguistics and sign language to a deaf education in response to the change of educational philosophy? In fact, this photo was taken when the Ministry of Education came to visit Hong Kong and to look at the program, the SALCO program. And so they took a picture, and I find this, very, very useful because a lot of these are in fact teachers from Singapore, and they came and observed how we set up this model. Now, let me give you a very brief summary of deaf education in Hong Kong. Now, we have about 1,000 deaf children, according to the government statistics. The government has to take care of about 1,000 deaf children with significant hearing loss. So that means, they have to wear hearing aids all the time. And the government also encourages mainstream integrative education, but in oral language only, and there is no sign language support. We have, now in terms of special education or deaf education in Hong Kong, we have one deaf school left. We used to have 4, but now we only have 1. And currently, their student population is about 60 or 60 plus. And they also started what they call a residential school, but not all students, joined, the school dormitory. Only a couple of them, because especially with those children with multiple disabilities, then they will be given the priority, to live on the school campus. Unfortunately, this deaf school is predominantly oral, and there is no systematic use of sign language in school. And even the school believes that sign language or natural sign language cannot support education because, again, Professor Woodward's opinion is correct. A lot of people, have the misconception that deaf, sign language has too limited vocabulary to support education. So, this school also, made the same comment. And as a result, they either create their own signs still based on Chinese, or they borrow some signs from Hong Kong Sign Language, but they still believe that this shouldn't be the prioritized language for communication. And because of this mentality, the teachers of this special schools has very, very low signing ability. Now, the outcome of deaf education in Hong Kong for so many decades, we've seen very, very low literacy development. We have seen low academic attainment. And in fact, a majority of deaf students cannot enter higher education. And for those students, deaf students who we meet, for instance, on the campus of CUHK, they were brought up in the oralist tradition, and they don't like sign language, and they never bother to come and talk with us because they believe that sign language is a taboo that they shouldn't touch. But however, I also looked at some of these students, and we believe that, in fact, they have a lot of struggle in education, even at CUHK. And they need to, wear the hearing aids, but they still couldn't catch up with the lessons. And they still think that, they can do it on their own. And in fact, as we all know, a lot of deaf students think that they can, survive education on their own with the support of their parents on their own efforts. And in fact, it is very, very painful experience to them. Okay, now my next slide. I think we have to acknowledge that both the UN Convention on Persons with Disabilities, and there's also the 21st International Congress on Educating for the Deaf, ICED, they both endorse sign language now in deaf education. And so how are we going to respond, to this international, the change of international practice? So we believe that we need sign language, we need deaf teachers in deaf education. Now, we started the SELCO education in 2006, okay? And so we are now in 2021. So next year, we are entering our 15th year, 15 years of operation. So after 15 years of hard work, as you can see, we have, in fact, what we called a through train of SELCO education. Now we started with baby signing program, that is for deaf children from age 1 probably, or age 6 months to 3 years old. And we give the parents baby signing training. And then on Saturday, when the children grow bigger, we will give them sign language supported reading. And so we have deaf teachers interacting, with the deaf students. They will be using sign language. We teach them vocabulary. We tell them stories in sign language. And we also help them, read the storybooks also, when they grow bigger. Now, when they reached age 3, then we will place them in a kindergarten that collaborate with us. And we call this Peace in, the name of the center is Peace Evangelical Center. It is a kindergarten. So in that kindergarten, the teachers responsible for teaching the deaf students are now very proficient in signing because they have been working with us for 15 years. So the teachers, have good signing skills. And one of the teachers actually became the school principal, the KG principal, and she endorses, sign language. She endorses deaf teachers, and now they actually have they hire one deaf teacher themselves, and we also supply them with deaf teachers. And so they have, the whole kindergarten of like 2 to 3 deaf teachers working with the hearing teachers and also teaching the deaf and hearing students together. Now, when the children finish their KG, we will move them to a primary school. Again, 6 years primary education. We will use the Salco philosophy. I will be talking about the Salco philosophy later. Okay, so after 6 years of primary education, we move the kids to secondary education. Again, we adopt the Salco philosophy. And after 6 years, the children will have to sit for the public examination. Okay, and if they are successful, then in fact they can apply for university degrees. So any universities, any program, they can apply. And at CUHK, starting from 2 years ago, I have set up a program which is called BA in Bimodal Bilingual Studies. It is in fact a sign language or sign linguistics program for CUHK students, because we want to train our students to be proficient in Hong Kong Sign Language. And we also give them some career training, like being an interpreter. We expose them to deaf education. We expose them to social work as well. So we hope that our graduates, our BA graduates in bimodal bilingual studies, will become teachers for the deaf, or social worker who can sign, or even sign interpreters for society. And this is the way we set up the program. And basically, every year, we admit 5 to 6 deaf children into the kindergarten. All right. So over time, we have accumulated, quite a big population of Salco students. And I have to emphasize that the Salco education philosophy not only benefits deaf students, it also benefits hearing students, because both deaf and hearing students are studying in the same class, taught by one hearing teacher from the school and one deaf teacher from our program. So the deaf teacher will use sign language and the hearing teacher will use speech. So both deaf and hearing students are using actually both languages, both sign language and spoken language in their education. Whichever mode they can access information, then they will use it. All right. Now, so let me just give you, some basic philosophy of Salco education. And this is what happens in the deaf school. This is our deaf teacher, and he is native in Hong Kong Sign Language. And this is the hearing teacher of the school. All right. And so they make use of a lot of visual resources, okay, to conduct teaching. By the way, the deaf teacher or the hearing teacher is not there for interpretation. They are there to co-teach. They co-plan the lessons beforehand, and then in the classroom, they co-teach. All right. So we ensure there is deaf and hearing co-teaching. We ensure that both sign language and spoken languages are occurring in the same classroom. In order to have a very, very strong deaf visibility, we make sure that there is a ratio. We call this a critical mass, a critical ratio of deaf and hearing students in the Salco classroom. And this is 1 deaf students to 3 to 4 hearing students. So in a class of like 20 or 24 students, we will have about 5 to 6 deaf students studying with about like 20 or sometimes 22 or 18 hearing students together. So this is Salco education in practice. And I have to say, this is in a mainstream classroom, but we incorporate sign language and deaf teachers into the mainstream environment because we want both deaf and hearing students to become bimodal, bilingual. That is, both deaf and hearing students, they can use sign language and they can also use spoken language. Now, the next one. Now, this is what we normally see in mainstreaming, and this is not what we endorse. In mainstreaming integrative education, you will have a whole class of hearing students, but then all of a sudden you have a deaf student sitting in between, and they seldom communicate with the hearing students because of communication barrier. And in a lot of cases, this sort of classroom will be using spoken language throughout, and there's no sign language support in Hong Kong. This is what we would like to do. We would like to see a class, a co-enrollment class that has, hearing students, but many deaf students, okay, in one class. So it could be that in one school, the same level, let's say, the same level like primary 1. So let's say this school has 4 classes of primary 1. So at the moment, we use 1 class as what we call the Salco class, okay? And the rest would be just ordinary classes like before. So we will have 1 class for grade 1, 1 class for grade 2, 1 class for grade 3, 4, 5, and 2, 6. Of course, in the future, we would like to see another class, but we have to build the program, okay, in such a way that in the future, we will be able to, get more deaf students into the system. Then I'm sure the school would be happy and prepared to start another class. Now, one thing that I would like to highlight to you is that the parents, even the parents of hearing students, welcome the inclusion of deaf students in the classroom. Because they always said, my child has become, more considerate and more emphatic. They know that, there are some classmates who cannot hear well, and they are quite willing to learn sign language to communicate with them. In fact, similar comments are also given by the teachers of the school. And in fact, a lot of teachers are quite happy to be assigned to this class because they said that the students there are easier to teach. Easier to teach to me would be easier to manage. But a lot of teachers said, then the personality and character development of the students of this class is quite different and more proactive and positive than the students of the other classes. Now, I don't have time to show you this video, and this will give you a lot of ideas about the Salco program. And if you download my PowerPoint in the chat room, you will be able to see this video. So enjoy when you have time. Now, as I've said, a lot of hearing students are very interested in learning sign language. And so they are queuing up for our interpreter training program. So we call this junior sign interpreters, and because we want hearing students to become a bridge, okay, between the hearing world and the deaf world. And so we give our junior students some training in interpretation. And you'll find that in the classroom, on the playground, whenever these students hear the school bell rings or even broadcasts from the loudspeakers, so these sign interpreters would quickly look for a deaf student, run to him, and then say, oh, there is an announcement. Let me interpret for you. And this is what happened at school now. Now, the future contribution of our sign bilingual students. Now we are talking about both deaf and hearing students. So what can they do in the future? Because they are bimodal bilingual, so they can actually serve children with autism. We now discover that sign language can also support children with autism, serving the elderly. If they become nurses, for instance, caretakers in the elderly home, they can use sign language to support the elderly. They can become interpreters. A lot of them said they like sports. And so some of them said they want to become a coach. Some of them want to become researchers of sign language. Quite a number of them want to become teachers for the deaf themselves because they want to teach deaf students themselves. And then some wants to become child care worker. And we have one student who wants to become a veterinarian, that is, to become, a doctor for the small animals. We're so happy about her. All right. Now, this is what happens to the spread of SELCO programs worldwide. SELCO program started in California, and this is a tripod program. Another one, propped up in Arizona, and then the Netherlands in Europe, Italy, Spain, Japan, Taiwan, and you see what happens. More and more countries are now joining, the SELCO approach, adopting the SELCO approach and joining our program. We are now working with China, with the Chinese government, the Macau government, the Singaporean government in developing a SELCO model in their places. And one of our program officers is now working with Germany as well. Germany intends to set up a SELCO program next year after the COVID. So we hope we will be able to visit Germany and then to find out how we can help them support SELCO model in the future. You see, this is our SELCO family. We have a Christmas party before COVID, and this is the size. And our SELCO model eventually won the Zero Project. And if you take a look at the mission of the Zero Project, and I like this a lot, it says our mission is working for a world with zero barriers. So worldwide, the Zero Project finds and shares models that improve the daily lives and legal rights of all persons with disabilities. And the Zero Project, eyed on our project and said, this is in fact the future model for deaf education in inclusive education in mainstream setting. So thank you very much indeed. This is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tang. It was a very enlightening presentation about the co-enrollment program, which was originated in Hong Kong and spread over the world. I'm very sure that there will be many questions from our audience. So we'll quickly move on to the next presentation by Prof. Felix. So I'll introduce you to Prof. Felix while
yeah, I'm trying to share my screen. I was able to do so beforehand. Let's see.
Yeah. Okay. So Professor Felix received her MPhil in linguistics from Chinese University of Hong Kong in the year 2000. And she completed her doctoral degree from Center for Deaf Studies, University of Bristol in 2008. Currently, she works as an associate professor at the Department of Linguistics and Modern Languages, Faculty of Arts of Chinese University, Hong Kong. So before joining the department, she was a postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Sign Linguistics and Deaf Studies. She has conducted research projects on sign and providing sign linguistic training to the deaf junior researchers from Asia Pacific countries. Her research interests include implementation of sign language lexical variants and discourse data in the Asia Pacific region, sign language typology, information structure and non-manuals in Hong Kong Sign Language, as well as language development of deaf children in Hong Kong. Over to you, Prof. Felix.
Okay, I know time is running out, so I will be fairly brief because I think it's more important to hear the experience of my deaf colleagues than just to listening to my boring presentation of what APSL program is about. The Asia Pacific Sign Linguistic Research and Training Program is, in my eyes, a very important deaf-centered training program that has nurtured a lot of hearing and deaf researchers in the field of sign linguistics. Let's see. Okay, it started in the year 2003 by Professor James Woodward and Professor Gladys Tang. We call that phase 1. Over the years, the APSL program has gone through several phases. We're now in phase 4. In phase 1, the purpose of the program was to train up deaf people to work on dictionaries and teaching materials, so that these resources can be used to promote sign language learning and teaching in the partner countries. At that time, 4 countries or places were involved in the training. We had training in Hong Kong, we had training in Cambodia, in Vietnam, and Philippines. At that time, it was a decentralized model. That means we sent instructors, of course, including Professor James Woodward, who was very important at that stage of development. So the instructors went to these places to conduct training. And you can take a look at the training contents at that time. We had programs that cover lexical structure, formational structure, grammatical structure, sociolinguistics, sign language lexicography, that is how to make sign language dictionaries, and also applied linguistics. That is, we train deaf people how to develop sign language teaching materials and how to teach effectively in a hearing classroom. One important element of the APSL program is to put what the students learn into practice. So apart from learning the skills of making dictionaries, learning basic sign linguistic knowledge, we also gave opportunities for deaf people to build their own resources. And here are some pictures showing the outputs of the training in that phase. As you can see, there were dictionaries, there were like online database, and also sign language teaching materials. When we moved on to phase 1 and phase 3, when we finished phase 1, we identified a number of difficulties. One being the insufficient instructors. We found it very hard to send instructors to different countries to conduct training and to supervise their work. So in phase 2 and 3, we decided to have a centralized model. So instead of we going out to different sites, we bring deaf people and hearing students to come to Hong Kong to receive the training. During these 2 phases, we involved training for Hong Kong deaf people from Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Japan, Fiji, and right now we are still working with the Myanmar team. And we also try to formalize the training in a university context. So here you can see we have several diplomas in different areas related to sign linguistics, dictionary making, and also sign language teaching. And we also established a higher diploma, which is equivalent to an associate degree in the United States. The higher diploma focus on sign linguistics and also sign language teaching. So these programs are basically for deaf students. Here are the pictures of our deaf students, and you can see our Sri Lankan deaf colleagues here in this photo as well. At the moment, we are still helping Myanmar to the Myanmar team to work on the dictionaries and teaching materials. Some of the graduates of our high diploma program continue their education in universities. As you can see, some of them ended up finishing an MA degree and some finishing a BA degree. And on the other hand, we also provide scholarships for hearing students who are interested in working with deaf people in this field to come to Hong Kong. They can study an MA degree, an MPhil degree, or a PhD degree if they pass our interviews and get our scholarships. So you can see that we do have here a number of hearing students receiving our scholarships and completing their studies. I think one of the most important philosophies of APSL program is that we train hearing people and deaf people to work as a team. On the other hand, to make sure that the program can sustain in the long run, we identify universities in Asia as partners, because we don't just train deaf people and hearing people. We want these graduates to be able to find a job in the universities to continue their work on sign linguistics. So it is for us very important to identify universities as partners. These universities, with our support, some of them are able to set up their research centers to hire our hearing and deaf graduates when they finish their studies. In the past few years, we have tried to establish more collaborations with these partner universities, and we set up a university consortium. Through the consortium, we organize webinars. Because of the pandemic, our original plan was to have like international conferences at a regional level, of course, and also training workshops in summer schools. But because of the pandemic, we like moved everything online, and we will continue to do so in the coming year. So the consortium, the purpose of it is to promote inter-university collaboration so that sign linguistics can take root in the Asia Pacific region. Here are our founding philosophy. Basically, we respect deaf people. We want to empower deaf communities through our program. And we also promote collaboration between hearing and deaf people. And of course, we also want to see sign language playing a much more important role in deaf education in the countries. So here are some of our the partners in the University Consortium. So as I mentioned, we have a lot of graduates so far, deaf and hearing. And as I mentioned, some of these graduates were able to set up research centers. For example, we also work with the University of Kelaniya, and it is a great honor to work with the Department of Disability Studies. And we're so happy that they have now a center for disability studies where they house our deaf graduates, and to continue their work on sign language documentation and sign language teaching. Just 2 years ago, before the pandemic, I was able to have a chance to present the recent development in Sri Lanka with Brian, one of our deaf graduates. It was well received. Here are the pictures of our presentation. Also, over the years, we have constructed an online database called the Asian Sign Bank. Right now, we are working hard on individual countries' websites. These are like publicly available resources for people in general or researchers to look at sign language lexical data. And it also has a lot of functions to help sign language instructors and also sign language researchers to compile materials. Okay, so here are the programs that are now available at our center. I think this is what I have prepared. I think it's time for me to pass the sharing time, the floor to our deaf colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Felix. So now we have our own APSL colleagues, Mr. Brian, Mr. Rasak, Ms. Geshani, and Ms. Paboda. Till they prepare themselves, I'll just introduction about them. So all of them joined the APSL program in 2007, and they have completed their diplomas. And currently, they're responsible for production of teaching materials, sign language data collection, building sign bank, and conducting analysis. They also do lectures about sign language, culture to the students at University of Kelaniya. And not only for the university students, they teach sign language for government officers, teachers of deaf schools, and students who are studying the Diploma of Sign Language Interpreters. Without time, over to you, Brian, Puboda, Geshani, and Rasak. Yeah, Rasak is there. Okay, so please share your experience with us. We would like to hear.
Hi,
Thank you.
I'm Rasak. I'm Rasak. I studied at Tihariya Special School. That is only for the Muslim students. And when I was studying in that school, so actually I didn't get a proper education because the teachers were not using sign language for this classroom, and only the teachers are using sign language. It was not enough for us to get our education. That is due to when I've been selected to CUHK, then I realized the teachers were fluent in sign language. The teachers were fluent in sign language. Even though they are hearing teachers, they were fluent in sign language, and it was very easy for us to learn and understand. Even though hearing teachers, they were very interesting to teach the deaf students. So they learn sign language. But in Sri Lanka, we don't have that situation. When I was studying, I got a scholarship for 6 years, and I got a diploma. I didn't get the higher diploma, but I got the diploma. I'm working as a researcher, and after I came to Sri Lanka, I thought of developing the deaf education in Sri Lanka, and we were actually we would like to make aware the students of university, to make them aware about I think we have teach them about sign language, and they are very interesting to learn sign language. So we are very happy that they would like to learn sign language. But they wanted to learn more and more, and they are very interesting. So we would like to continue the program. So maybe the Kelaniya University and the Disability Study, Department of Disability Studies unit students, we would like to do that. Now at the pandemic situation, we are unable to hold that program, but it's very difficult to do it through Zoom. So maybe sometimes the students are using only mobile phones. So when we have this program live, then it's very easy. So we are hoping that when the pandemic situation becomes, then we will be able to do that. So that is my vision. Thank you. I go on. I'm born deaf, and I studied I studied here in school, but it was very difficult because I couldn't learn and I was neglected. And after that, I went to a special school in down south where they use sign language. So I was realized that I would be able to learn through sign language, and I was being teach to read and write, and I studied up to O level. And after that, I worked as a architecture for 20 years. Actually, sign language, I was not realized about the about the sign language. So that means that about the grammar, about the rules of the sign language. Even we don't know. We know that only that we are using that as a communication media. So after in year 2007, I was able to, I got a scholarship to go to CUHK and study. And what is the language and what is the interesting of the sign language, and I was learning about it. And former, I was not aware about it. So the importance of the sign language and the culture and so we were learning about all. So that was very interesting. After 6 year completed, and then I came to Sri Lanka. So when I was actually I'm married, and I'm married to a deaf lady, and I have 2 children. So my mother used to say my mother's to tell not to talk to my children in sign language, because that will be a that's a sickness, that will be a sick. So my mother is to look after the children, because she is a hearing person, and she was talking to the children. So after I studied in CUHK and I came back to Sri Lanka, I took my children with me and I taught them sign language. And my both children, they use sign language, and they use spoken language too. So they use sign language with us, and they use spoken language with others. So they are also interpreters. So that is a good awareness program. So when we conduct programs to parents, government officials, we used to make them aware about that. And Sri Lanka Central Federation of the Deaf, presently I'm the president of the Sri Lanka Central Federation of the Deaf. So I appointed in year 2016. So we are working very hard to promote the sign language, proposed sign language bill. So we are working very hard to get the parliament approval to sign language. So we are very happy, and we are very thankful to Nippon Foundation and to CUHK and BBS, to Professor Tang, Professor Budi, and Professor Felix. So when I see them, I was very, very happy, because I didn't see them for a long time. Thank you very much. I'm Kuboda. I'm very thankful for giving us this opportunity. I'm having a problem with my internet. I am Kuboda. I'm sorry, I'm having a problem with my internet. But anyway, I'm very happy to see all of you, and I'm very happy for giving this opportunity. And I formally, I studied in Makar Special School, and I studied up to O level, and after that I was selected to go to CUHK. And when they teach us about the language and things, then we will realize that I am born deaf. But when we went to CUHK, then actually we doesn't know about this, that the sign language have grammar, and there's rules for the sign language, and the facial expressions, that are all the very important things. So my future, because of lot of people, they really thought that the deaf people cannot get a good education because they don't have a good education, and they were thinking about negative. But now we realize that after we attend the CUHK, they encourage us, saying that the deaf people, you can do that, you can do this. So after that, we got the diploma. We received the diploma, and now we know that we are we had a good education, and our parents also realized that even though we are deaf, we can do everything. So actually, we are very happy, and we are very thankful to Nippon Foundation and CUHK because we are very we are in a good manner. If we had not got an opportunity to visit CUHK and get the education, I think we were never we were never have this type of education and this type of knowledge. So actually, we were working very, very hard. But anyway, we are very happy for the situation we are here today. So even though we don't have opportunity to work with the students in Kelani and DDS, we have to do through online because of this pandemic situation. Thank you. Must be a problem, internet problem with Deshan. I am having a problem with my internet. I'm sorry.
Since Geshani is having some connection issues, we'll move on to the question and answer session. So by the time if she's able to figure out to reconnect, we'll have her in our discussion. So we have a question to Professor Woodward and Professor Tan. Of all the aspects of the programs put together in Vietnam and Hong Kong, what would you say is the key to its success?
You mean, do you want me to respond now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I think you need to have a team of people who understand the nature of sign language as well as sign linguistics. And you also need a team of people who are proficient in sign language, understands its nature, understand the structure, and also to understand deaf culture and deaf philosophy. Professor Woodward just come back. Maybe he wants to add something.
Well, I think the best success for any program in deaf education is to involve, as Professor Tong says, to involve people, all the people who know about sign languages, but it's most important to have deaf adults from your local community, I think, involved. And they should be able to give you a clear idea about what worked for them and what they think will work, what worked for them, what didn't work for them, and why. But you have to gain the trust of deaf people before they will be totally honest with you about the education. But the best thing you can do you already know signs? Local signs? For the person who asked the question, do you already know signs?
Hello. Okay. Sorry, Professor, my microphone, something's wrong with my microphone. Okay. That person, I would say no up to some level, but not very fluent in sign language.
Okay. When you sign, do you speak and sign at the same time or sign without speaking?
Sorry, Professor Woodward, can you repeat your question?
Yes. So am I talking with a deaf person or a hearing person?
You're talking with a hearing person.
Okay. When you try to sign with deaf people, do you speak and sign at the same time, or do you sign without speaking?
I do speak at the same time.
Okay, then you can't be using Sri Lankan Sign Language. Because when you speak and sign at the same time, the same individual, the grammar is going to be different. So what you can do is associate yourself with deaf people and then learn the sign language as they use it. I don't know, what do the Sri Lankan APSL people think about that?
Bernie, we can't hear you. On mute.
Sorry. Actually, the facial expressions and sign language is very interesting when you are using sign language. When you are, when you are using sign language, if you speak, then it's very difficult to understand because the hearing people, they will use the grammar properly, but the deaf people, they use the grammar, not according to the hearing people. So, most of the time, the deaf people are using facial expressions, but sometimes they use when we say mother, they say mother, Colombo, this is Colombo, so you can see the lips. But most of the time, you have to use sign language and facial expressions. That is only combining.
Okay, so thank you so much, Professor Woodward, Prof. Tang, Prof. Felix, and our APSL colleagues for joining this session. So thankful for you to join and sharing your experience with us. So since we are a little bit tight in our schedule, we have to wind up today's discussion. Thank you so much. But I hope you'll be able to share the questions with you and hope you won't mind